Okay, let's get back into Photoshop. So here I've already taken all of my render layers from Clarice that have now finished rendering and brought them into Photoshop, the same way that I showed you earlier. So I just decided to skip that step because I've already shown how to do it, and there are a lot of images here that I've brought in, so it would have taken a little while to bring them all in and to name them, which I do recommend doing. Name all of your layers in Photoshop after whatever they are in Clarice. So, in terms of order, we want to have our environment light to serve as a base right at the bottom. All of our triplanar textures and other lights will be applied over the top of this using blend modes. So let's just right click on this and assign it a color. I recommend doing this for your different layer groups just to make it a little bit clearer for yourself what everything is. It really does help later on, trust me. So let's set this to green, and then over the top of it we have distant light. So this is my other render layer featuring the other light, and I will either apply this as linear dodge, which takes all of the values from this image and adds them straight on top of this in a simple plus operation. So I can either go with linear dodge, which looks pretty good, or I can maybe go with color dodge, and I might do a little bit of a mix of both later because I like linear dodge effect better on the city buildings, whereas I think the linear dodge looks better on the water. So, but for now let's keep it this way. And then in between them we have all of our triplanar textures. So let me just disable this for a second. I put all of these together because we will do quite a lot of work with them, and we kind of don't want them scattered about our Photoshop file. We want to make it nice and clean and really keep all of these together for easier access. So what we do want to do though is set our group blending mode as overlay. So now we can see our textures overlaid straight over our environment light base, and we can see an instant effect of what everything looks like with that texture applied. So within the group, however, they're all set to normal. So the group overrides the blending mode of all of the images within. So let's make this red, and let's make the distant light blue. Might change this to color dodge actually. And then over the top of the three of these, which are sandwiched together, we have our ambient occlusion, which is our render that gives us all of the nice corners and edges. And we want to set it as multiply. So the effect of this is quite apparent. If I turn it off and on, we see that we're getting a nice outline around most objects. Now we might want to play with this later, maybe change the opacity or make it slightly weaker in some parts depending on how we feel about the image, and that's perfectly fine to do, but for now let's just keep it applied at full strength. And above that we have our depth. So for the depth we'll want to set it as screen, and this applies really nicely. We might want to play with the opacity, or if we go into blending options and move this arrow, we can play around with where it begins. So if we click down Alt and drag one of these halves, we can make the haze recede slightly based on the distance. For example, like that. That looks a little bit nicer already. Okay. And on top of that, we want to have our volume pass. So this again, we'll set as screen. And again, we can play around a little bit with the blend if to isolate the rays a little bit. for example, like this. So now we're getting the rays addition to the image as well. Okay. And lastly, at the top, let's import all of our ID render passes. As you can see, I've rendered individual ones for all of the different types of items I had in my image, all of the big chunks, which I had separated into the separate folders, remember? You know, like screen left, foreground, middle, or screen left, foreground, tower, screen left, midground, tower, bottom city. I split all of those out so I could work on them individually. All of the temples, the background, random other elements that I had separated, the water, of course, arches, here steps as well, and the piers I had placed along the shorelines. And lastly, I rendered out the normal map, and I did this in two modes. I did this using the object-based mode, which we talked about, as well as the world-based mode within the triplanar node, I believe. Okay, so these will be all of my IDs with which I will control where my triplanars appear. So let's just change the color of these layers as well. Let's make ambient occlusion gray. Let's make Z depth yellow, and then let's make the volume orange, and IDs we can make violet. This will help us not get lost as much, hopefully. So another thing I'll quickly show is that one of my triplanars I actually kept as a normal render without the matte material in Clarice. I just rendered it with a standard material with the gold texture applied, and it won't work as well with our other technique. Oops, sorry, normal. If I bring it out a little bit clearer this way, that it's gold. But when in the triplanars, which are overlay, it will not work as well when overlaying it as our other layers did. So this one I'm going to bring outside by itself, and I'm going to create a new group, and I'm going to call it gold. And in your projects, do this for any material that you created where the specular reflections actually do play a big part in that material. So something that can't just be a simple non-reflective, you know, stone or rock or wood or whatever. So, you know, for things like metal, maybe in some parts, you might want it to be reflective. So for those ones, I would render them out separately and then split them away from triplanars. So let's just close these down. So for the gold, we're not gonna set it to overlay, we're just gonna keep it on normal. And just to show what I'm thinking with it is, for example, if I find my temples, yep, blue here, I can utilize this ID very simply in Photoshop. I can just go into channels here. If you don't have that window, just go into window, channels, and enable it there. And I will want to select the blue channel. If I isolate these, you can see that this is the blue channel, followed by the green channel and the red channel. Put together, obviously, they make the whole image. So what I want to do is hold down Control and just click on the blue channel, and this will select everything within it. And then if I disable my ID group, and in my gold, I click on my layer and click to create a mask. And now this gold is only applied to the objects within this mask, which are the temples. So for now, I'll keep that. I'll just disable it for now though. Works nicely with the distant light actually as well. Okay, we'll come back to that later. Lastly, just a quick explanation of how we'll structure the rest of the painting around this layer base. So we will have everything that conforms to the geometry. So for example, any triplanar that we apply will be applied directly to a piece of geometry, or if we do any painting that doesn't escape the bounds of individual objects on the geometry, we will place between our environment base light and our distant light, because this actually would override and make fuzzy work of any painting that is underneath it that goes outside the bounds. It would look slightly weird. So this is everything that conforms to the geometry, and in addition we have the ambient occlusion, which emphasizes every already existing outline. So if we had anything that strayed outside of the outlines here, in between these layers, it would again be in conflict with the ambient occlusion and wouldn't work as nicely. And the z-depth in some cases can also contribute to that, where maybe we want to paint something here that juts out here, and we want it to be at the same haze level as this arch, or this temple rather. The haze would override that if our layer that we painted on was underneath it. So again, everything that we paint here, we want to conform to the geometry. And then, well, some things we can get away with. For example, here there would not be a big difference, so we'll do quite a bit of that. But for anything major, we'll put it above the haze. And then our volume acts the same way, really, in that case, in that it again emphasizes the geometry. So this, we got to make sure we don't ruin the effect, but it's not too bad. We can place a lot of bespoke painting that goes outside the bounds between these two layers. It shouldn't cause too much trouble. But yeah, everything that changes the shapes and outlines of the geometry will go in this area. Okay? In this or this. But never below the ambient occlusion. So here's, for example, a little example. Let's just disable all of these. If I want this temple to maybe be bigger, and I paint extra, when I apply the ambient occlusion, we're already getting some lines over this that we don't want, and the z-depth again ruins it, and our effect doesn't work. So if we want to actually change the shapes of objects later on, we have to do it above these layers in this area here. But we can get away with a little bit if, say, we do have it underneath the fog, but we're only painting here. The difference in fog level isn't really that noticeable, so it's sort of a I guess case by case basis, where you have to think about what you are painting and where you are painting it. And as long as you keep all of that clean, you'll have no problem not getting lost in your project. On big projects like this, it's much more beneficial to actually work in a nice and organized and clean manner, because it saves you time in the long run and it's just more efficient. You'll be a more efficient artist. There's no reason not to do it. Okay, so in the next video, we're going to jump into looking at how to apply our triplanars using the IDs and get some textures over our image. Okay, see you there.